Hi, everybody. Father Shawn Clerkin here, Director Emeritus of Dramashop, soon to be retired professor at Gannon University in their theater and communication arts programs, and also just a great friend of and lover of musical theater. I was originally going to do my lecture today on censorship from the left and from the right. I might return to that at another time. Talking about how difficult it is to do certain plays in certain environments, certainly in this time, but also the danger of what happens when we don't do them at all. There'll be plenty of opportunities for that conversation. Just yesterday in the New York Times, a group of panelists got together to talk about the new West Side Story. And many Latinx individuals were there to reflect on their experience of that piece. And so there's plenty of times for us to get into that conversation. But with the recent passing of Stephen Sondheim, Zach Flock, our artistic director here at Dramashop, invited me to consider the realities of that. Executive director of Dramashop, right? Artistic? I'm just going to call him the Grand Poobah of Dramashop. Might be a better name for it. And he said, "Why don't we talk about Sondheim?" And I had that moment of gulp. I have to say, Lerner and Loewe brought me to musical theater. My very first musical was Camelot with the Footlighters of Elk County Incorporated. And we performed Camelot on the stage at Ridgeway High School. I was an unnamed character who became a named character, which is unusual. They brought me in really just to play the trumpet solos and everything. And they eventually started calling me Harold the Herald. So that I was my first named part in a musical. So while Lerner and Loewe brought me to the musical theater, it was certainly for me, Stephen Sondheim's work that kept me there. At the end of my senior year, before I came to Gannon as a pre-med major, back in the day, I actually had a chance to perform the role of Tony in West Side Story at the Footlighters of Elk County. And that was my first encounter with Stephen Sondheim, not as a composer, obviously, but as a lyricist. Sondheim was invited before he really kind of got his sea legs and started making the kind of impact he would make with Forum and going forward. He was invited into two opportunities to write lyrics. The first was with Leonard Bernstein and West Side Story. Arthur Lawrence wrote the book of the musical. In many ways, Sondheim, even in a recent interview, he said, "I'm not so sure that is my best work." He wasn't particularly proud of the work. He doesn't want a do-over or anything like that. He just said, I'm not necessarily, he doesn't think that's definitely something he's proud of or that he would be a part of. But his dear friend, Oscar Hammerstein II, who he got to know after Sondheim's parents were divorced, his mother moved into a home, I think it was in Connecticut, next door to Oscar Hammerstein II. And Oscar Hammerstein II became a father figure to him. In that same interview, he said, you know, if Hammerstein had done anything else, and I'm paraphrasing, if he had been a hockey player, for example, Sondheim would have probably followed him into hockey. Whatever Oscar Hammerstein II was, Stephen Sondheim loved and admired, and he saw him as his mentor and his inspiration. And Sondheim had an opportunity then, as he continued to work with Oscar Hammerstein, to engage musical theater in a very special way. So my first foray was with West Side Story. And that was also then my first performance at the Playhouse, playing, again, Tony opposite Trisha Yates's Maria in West Side Story. In fact, our very first audition for David Matthews was Trisha and I singing the entire balcony scene for him, the Tonight duet for the audition. We were just going to sing a couple of phrases, but she had played the role, I think, in high school, or she was familiar with it, and I had played the role at the Footlighters. And so we walked in that summer, and we sang the entire scene together. And we were happy to see our names on the cast list. Back when they used to post the cast list, they would hang it outside the Playhouse rehearsal hall doors up here, where PACA is now. That was the Playhouse rehearsal hall. And so they would, we would actually, you know, wake up early in the morning. They would post it at midnight, or they would post it first thing in the morning. And we would drive there, and there'd be 30, 40 people lined up to see who had what role. Now we just wait for a note online, or sometimes even just a personal nudge from the stage manager saying, "We've started rehearsals, you've got to roll." That's kind of the way things go now. But at that time, we were so excited. And then we would go and, you know, grab breakfast or something like that at the market or something. And it was a great time. I really appreciated the lyrics of Sondheim at that time. For me, it was It was a joy to play a role like that, to sing the songs more than anything, the glorious melodies. Something's Coming was a great set of lyrics, I thought. However, I will say that playing Tony was one of the least exciting roles in the show. Tony was supposed to be the former leader of the Jets, and somehow he was turned into this simpering romantic that just never seemed to be believable in that role. Even in the recent film, the individual who plays the role, I can't remember his name, Ansel, maybe, the name is not coming to me. But his reviews have said that he's probably the weakest link in the cast right now. And I don't necessarily blame him having played the role. You don't get a lot of things to sink your teeth into. Tonight, the world was just an address, a place for me to live in, no better than all right. What kind of gang leader would sing something like that? And Sondheim himself knew that was a struggle. And he wasn't really quite into the position where he had a chance to move on. I looked over the list of shows and I thought, well, I must have done a couple of Sondheim shows. And I'm not patting my back, and I'm not saying that I'm some kind of expert because of this. But I have directed Assassins and Forum, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and Into the Woods. I have conducted, well, not Sondheim scores, but I've conducted Gypsy, which Sondheim wrote the lyrics for, and also I've conducted West Side Story. I was almost cast in Merrily We Roll Along at the Encore Dinner Theater when we used to have a dinner theater at what is now the Avalon Hotel. It used to be a Hilton Hotel, and Ben Agresti, may he rest in peace, had an opportunity to create a summer series there. And so I did Pippin and Cabaret, and we were supposed to start Merrily We Roll Along, but they canceled the dinner theater. So we were almost at the first rehearsal. I had learned a few lines and had to eject those. The shows I've not been a part of were Anyone Can Whistle, Do I Hear a Waltz, Pacific Overtures, Evening Primrose, The Frogs. I had nothing to do with any of those. But I have had a chance to perform either in a production or in a staged concert version, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. And A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Sweeney Todd, Company, Follies, West Side Story, A Little Night Music, Sondheim on Sondheim. And so I guess I've had a few opportunities to perform a few roles in Sondheim shows. The things that I like best about Sondheim, no, let's start with the things I like worst about Sondheim. The words. There's just so many lyrics, and he loves polysyllabic rhyming words. He loves to go into a dictionary, or a thesaurus. In fact, when he writes, he kept a thesaurus beside him. So he would always check on every single word and make sure that it was the right word with the right number of syllables so that it scanned with the music that he had already written. The thesaurus was a very valuable thing. In fact, using his example, when I had a chance to write a couple of musicals for the Playhouse, most recently the Rapunzel the musical, I kept that close by, making sure that I was trying to work in words just like Sondheim would. Now, I will say that my music and lyrics are forgettable. Most people, I don't think there's any recordings of them anywhere. Although I hear some people have, some of the kids from the original Sleepy Hollow actually have a video out there without my permission, without my licensing, but they're out there with that too. But the words are a pain in the butt. There are so many of them. He loves to switch up lyric to lyric. It's not like you get a verse and a repeated chorus, a verse and a repeated chorus. No, even the choruses sometimes are transforming and shaping in different ways. He even changes the melody in different choruses from moment to moment. He'll extend certain phrases, or he'll add in additional phrases or B phrases in the middle of something you think should be a repetition from something before. But there's also something wonderful about that. As an actor, to be able to continue to explore new lyrics with every iteration of a song. I think when I'm looking over the list of things that I did, some parts of Forum, for example, are just ridiculous in how you feel like you're repeating a verse or repeating a song, but you're not really repeating a song. So I really appreciated and hated that about Sondheim. The other thing I appreciate and hate about Sondheim is certainly the melodies themselves. When you sing an Oscar Hammerstein or a Lerner and Loewe musical or any of the Golden Age musicals, they wrote at a time when there was no amplification. And so when you follow the topography of some enchanted evening, you will meet a stranger, you will meet a stranger, you kind of have to follow it. And they wrote songs so that you could fill the space, because as the pitch rose, the volume rose, because there were no microphones, or if they were just stage mics that might have gone across the front. Can you imagine a time when you didn't have to microphone any performer on the stage, right? What a great time that would be. In fact, when I had a chance to visit Syracuse University about 15 years ago, 20 years ago for ACTF, I noticed that none of the actors had microphones on. And I had asked them, I'm thinking, you're Syracuse Musical Theater, you're one of the biggest programs here on the East Coast. Why aren't they wearing mics? And they said, well, you know, mics sometimes don't work. And they said, and what happens to a student who doesn't know how to project? And so they don't let their students work with microphones. They have a couple of floor mics just in case, but for the most part, they have to sing over the accompaniment. But when you come to Sondheim, by the time Sondheim comes along, there's a lot of amplification going on. So the nature of the songs changed dramatically. He has more opportunity to base pitch on anxiety or emotion within the character itself. So when George, for example, in Finishing the Hat, comes that moment where he's realizing that his relationship with Dot is beginning to fray, and he has to hit those high notes. They're not coming because of amplification needs or the need to be heard in an audience, but they're coming from this desire to pitch the character in a certain direction. The music of Sondheim has been some of the most explosive emotional moments I've ever had on the stage. Sweeney Todd singing My Friends, for example. My arm is complete again. This explosiveness at the end of that song as he first opens up the case that has his barber blades, his razors, which he will eventually use not just to shave but to slaughter humanity in response to his terrible experiences himself. Vengeance. I always, by side note, I agree with Sondheim. I always found Sweeney Todd to be extraordinarily funny. I never thought it was a horror film. I never thought it was scary. I just thought it was ridiculously over the top and loved every single slash that I had an opportunity to do in the role, which, by the way, was supposed to be a concert version. Zach was in it with me, and I remember walking in the very first rehearsal. God bless David Matthews, may he rest in peace. But we walked in the first rehearsal, and he said, oh, by the way, it's not a concert version. You won't be holding music. I need you to memorize it, and we're going to stage it kind of like they staged the Chicago concert, which is still one of the longest. It's now the longest running production on Broadway. It was originally just supposed to be a concert, and at city stages. And so now suddenly we're doing the whole entire production, and we have to memorize it. And I was not happy with that. You did get to kill me. That was a moment, Zach. That was your moment of vengeance, I think, after all the torture I put you through in your lifetime. So the music is exciting, the lyrics are exciting, but the most important thing, I think, for theater in general is about character. Now, character was very different for Sondheim. Before Sondheim, in the golden age of musicals, the story was the most important thing. And so as characters would explore stories, it was more important to see their Freitag arc. Right? You see the complications building. We see these little crises, moments of decision, and then finally the big crisis, which is the climax of the piece, from which a character has to do something so new that they can no longer go back to the end of the play. They have to go forward through the denouement and into the next rising action, right? So with traditional musicals, they always went in that direction, and they were very linear. They were very chronological. Things kind of worked in that direction. And because of that, the songs then always kind of fell into patterns. You had discovery songs, you had patter songs, you had comic songs, you had romantic songs, you had self-revelation songs, and then you had that big song that brought it all together. Oklahoma, the big song. Camelot, a big song. Although I think in Camelot, the bigger song at that moment was Guinevere, Guinevere, which actually leads into her being saved by Lancelot. But there was always this kind of trajectory that the musical was going on. Sondheim reversed that. He was no longer interested, and he and people like him. Now, he was part of a movement, although he was certainly the focal point of the movement. We moved out of these story-generated musicals and more concept musicals. Now, we've thrown that word around a lot. Concept musical essentially just means it's not going to be linear, it's not going to be chronological, it's not going to be narratively based. It's going to be based more on an overall experience of the musical. In fact, in many of the musicals, you could probably, and people might argue this, and I'll support their argument, you could probably take a lot of these pieces and pull them in and out. And they're not necessarily in any particular order as much as they are conceptual. There's exceptions, certainly the first act of Into the Woods, where you have to go 1 midnight gone, 2 midnight gones. We're coming up on the 3rd midnight, the last midnight. They do have a sequence, but within those sequences, does Jack need to sing before Giants in the Sky, after, or before something? We hear Little Red story of her surrender, or her escape from and slaughter of the wolf. I don't know. It's not necessary that we necessarily do things in a particular order. Same thing with Company. Same thing with Follies, the revelations of these memories these individuals are having, and then the recreations of life then, and musical theater then, that is part of this experience of this edifice that they're remembering in Follies. The idea of a concept musical then is about the ideas. It's not necessarily about the through line, all right? So as an actor, I find that to be really liberating, because I can have a big emotional moment that is not necessarily connected to the next moment that I have to sing. I'm not necessarily working in that kind of sequential mode. I also like the fact that when things are concept, then I don't have to base my current emotion on a previous scene. When you're doing a linear drama or a linear opportunity, sometimes you do have to say that my character is learning from the previous scenes and the previous experiences. In a concept musical, my character is almost existential. The things that have happened in the previous song or the previous scene, or the things that are about to happen in the next scene, are inconsequential to me. I don't have to worry about connecting this moment to that or this moment to that. It's more important that I connect thematically as an overall theme, or more important that I connect maybe even stylistically to how the piece is being written. Richard Kislin, in his book, The Musical. Now, I will say Richard Kislin, he's a little fun when it gets to his writing. I have to say, I don't know that he's completely academic, but he's a real good read. And this book about the history of American musical theater up into the end of the 20th century is a really excellent book. And his comments on Sondheim, I think, are really great. He talked about the importance of this concept musical, and there are things that he said you have to have for that musical to happen. Some of the precepts are: compose the songs chronologically, write them in sequence depending on how you're writing them. But again, with a concept musical, you don't have to necessarily worry that this scene is reliant upon a previous scene, or that this scene is setting up the next scene. But writing them gives you a sense, he says, sensitivity to continuity and contrasts in tone. So you're trying to make sure that the song I'm writing in relationship to the previous and earlier songs and the next songs is not necessarily carrying through the same way. He says, regard each song as a drama through music. All of Sondheim's songs, you can take each one out of the sequence, and they almost become musical monologues in themselves. A character will make discoveries within that song or within that unit. And he said, esteem songwriter as playwright, and I love that too. And Sondheim did this too. Now, when he was first working with Hammerstein gave him, I think, 4 different things, and I hope I can remember them. He said, number 1, I want you to take a really good play that's really well, has a great reputation, and I want you to turn it into a musical. Number 2, I want you to take a really bad play and turn it into a musical. He said, I wanted you to take a mediocre play and turn it into a musical, and then I want you to take a musical that's mediocre and make it better. And so I think those were the 4 things, or there was something like that. You know, there might be a different 4 things, but that's what Shawn perceives at this moment in time. But there is this idea of trying to explore what's already in existence. But what Sondheim learned in that exercise was that the playwright is no less or no more important than the lyricist or the lyricist songwriter. The songwriter is writing a play. In musical theater, we always say the key to musical theater is that we as characters can no longer just say what we're feeling as we would in a play. The emotions have taken us to a place where we have to sing it. Words are not sufficient. Or we have to dance it because I can't stand and say this. I have to actually move my body in relationship to that. When people say musical theater isn't reality, I'm like, yeah, no shit. I get that. No, musical is not reality. Oh, I said the S word. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to say the S word? Okay. That's right. It's not. It's all a virtual reality, right? The whole idea is that we create a space here that people can respond to, right? And that they can see what we need them to see. And we do our best to make sure they see it in a real way. The best actors are the ones who, when they come to a song, you just feel the emotion coming even before the introduction starts. The actors who need a little work are the ones who kind of stand there, and then suddenly the song starts or the cue starts, and they're jumping into an emotion that they haven't built in before that. key to musical theater performance. Another thing they say, search the script for clues for a song. Many times in the old versions, they would write songs and then shove them into available spots within a musical. Within the concept musical, the idea is that you don't want to put a song in where you don't need a song. And sometimes you will have these vast opening numbers. 1776, which was written, after the golden age of musical theater, and it's very linear. I love the fact that after Sit Down, John, there is a 45-minute, it's one of the longest breaks, if you've ever played in the pit for that or been on stage. There's a 45-minute break before you get to the second song of the show after Sit Down, John. Part of the joy of that is there's no place to put a song. You could put a song in if you were, trying to write a golden age book musical, but 1776 itself is also a concept. It's a concept musical. Yes, it's linear. Yes, it's chronological, but it's also very selective about where the songs fall in. And I like this idea that if it doesn't need a song, don't put a song in. And if it needs a song, put a song in. Sometimes we've seen that too. He would also say, condense the dialogue, because if you condense the dialogue, sometimes the dialogue then becomes the song itself. And I think that happens frequently. I see it a lot in Sunday in the Park with George. I see it in Passion. Passion actually is interesting because it almost feels like the whole entire thing, it's practically all sung. There's a lot of recitatives, what we would say in opera, just sung dialogue over top of chords. Within that piece as well. He also says, Richard Kislin says that with concept musicals, avoid predictability, aim for surprise. When you go to see a Sondheim show, it's not unusual to suddenly be shocked at what just happened. When I saw Into the Woods in New York, for example, at the Martin Beck Theater with its original Broadway run, I loved the first act. This mixing of matching, this mashup of stories and songs, and it was so much fun to see everything work out happily ever after at the end. And then we come into Act 2, and they're singing How Happily Ever After, but nobody really seems to be happy. And then suddenly, spoiler alert, suddenly the giant's wife, they've killed the giant, now the giant's wife shows up and she wants to exact revenge on all of the humans, and she steps on and kills the narrator. And I remember sitting in the audience at that moment, and other people may not have this visceral response, and I was like, holy shit, now what? Who's going to tell them what happens next? And I was immediately in that world of, oh, now they have to make decisions on their own. And I went, oh, it's a concept musical about moving from adolescence into adulthood. You can't blame mom and dad anymore you can always blame, let's be honest, we can always blame mom and dad. They said some things in pattern by the time we were 7 years old and we're still trying to fight it. But in reality, you can't sit there anymore. At some point in time, you have to take responsibility. You have to do those things which you have to do to survive. You have to do those difficult things and sometimes immoral things in order to make it through this next moment. The killing of the giant's wife, it's a big issue. Do we have the right to kill, to take another life just to preserve ourselves? Is that, well, and it's a really kind of an unusual question from a liberal perspective. And their solution is, well, yeah, and I think that's an interesting one as well. So anyway, so those are some things about concept musicals which I think are really interesting. I wanted to go through and I kind of jokingly in the description of the piece, I kind of had said that that there were some moments that the scorecard was Sondheim 7, Shawn 1. I don't know whether those numbers are actual. I feel like I've been beat up by Sondheim many times. In Forum, it was the beat up was playing Pseudolus was it was exhausting. He never leaves. I don't think I left the stage very much at all. There were a couple of moments backstage. It was also exhausting because it's a farce more than anything. And farce is driven by an appetite for sex and an appetite for food, and sometimes combining the two together. Sexy food or foodie sex. That certainly was what Forum is all about. The coupling was the most important part of that. And getting to that place was really very difficult. And at the same time, and on top of that, then you add these really strange, really strange intervals, right? La da da Maria, that wonderful tritone, that little break there that leads into the dominant, or it leads into the fifth. Those little moments in Forum were kind of a little exhausting. Plus, the other problem with Forum is it's a comedy. And when you cast people like myself and David Matthews as Hysterium and Pseudolus, it was like Moby Dick. There was times when we got so far away from the script, I don't know that we could ever find our way back. Thank God there were enough people who would like immediately come in when we would do something like that. I think when it came to A Little Night Music, which I really enjoyed too, I remember working with Annie Murphy, I was saying earlier. She was a high school student, local high school student at Harbor Creek High School, and we worked together at a couple of Playhouse Youth Theater camps. And to suddenly in my 40s to be playing opposite her and to have her play my wife was really uncomfortable. But that was the point of the musical: an older man and a younger woman who have not consummated their marriage because, well, it's just hard to do at that moment. And also, is it really what both persons want? And he's having an affair with Desiree Armfeld, this older actress who sings Send in the Clowns, which, by the way, was the first song I ever sang by myself when I was in 9th grade. Rick Ziegler at Johnsonburg High School, he was my high school chorus director. And Rick and Betsy Ziegler, great friends, and then we have other mutual friends with other folks as well. But Rick said, I think you should sing a song for our spring talent show. And I went, sure. So I stood there at a podium with Send in the Clowns, and I actually just found the sheet. As I was packing up my office, I found my original sheet music. What would that be, from 1977? Oh my gosh, you weren't even born yet, right? No, thanks, that helps. So there I found my music, and I stood there and I sang Send in the Clowns because I'd heard it on the radio. Judy Collins had the top 40 version of the song, and A Little Night Music has become a favorite musical for me as well. I'm really thankful I don't have to play that role again. Patrick Thiem is going to be doing it this time around. And I actually was invited with a few other folks to be part of the Liebeslieders, the quintet that sings between songs. And I went, oh, it's so nice to be in a chorus, until I looked at the score and I realized the Liebeslieders sing more than any of the principals combined. So we have a lot of singing ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to doing that as well. I loved and hated playing Sweeney Todd. The emotions of Sweeney Todd, again, so much fun to be a murderer, and a mad murderer at that. But the music just goes places, especially in the first half of the show. The second half of the show, Sweeney does a lot of killing. He has a couple of moments, but Pretty Women being the return to Pretty Women being one of them. But he doesn't do as much singing as much as he does brooding, and that was kind of fun. But that was one of those concerts that we did where David asked us to memorize and stage, which he then turned around and did the same thing for Company, which Elmy and I had a chance to play the husband and wife in that as well. And Company I really like because it's just one of the jazziest scores ever. So much fun. Side by Side, the opening of the second half, is one of my favorite pieces ever to sing, only because it's such a great group of people. Charlie Cortor staged it for us, and we had a great time with that one as well. Most recently, I had a chance to perform in Sondheim on Sondheim with the Playhouse just a few years ago. This was a kind of a musical review that Sondheim himself used, and they incorporated interviews with him, video interviews that were inserted in between things. This is the opportunity I had to finally sing Finishing the Hat on stage. I aged out of and was never available, or was never cast or any opportunity to play George Surratt in Sunday in the Park with George. It's probably my favorite musical. I had a chance to see Bernadette and Mandy do it in New York. And the first half of that musical, I think, is probably one of my favorite musical theater units. I take that back. It's not one of, it is the single favorite thing that I've ever watched on stage. And this is back before we had projections, and they actually took white canvas and they turned the stage into an afternoon on the Grand Jambe, the great Surratt painting, and framed it. And it was just one of the most exciting experiences. But I think what I really loved about it from a concept perspective was this notion of how we explore art and we find the artist in ourselves and why we do what we do, and the sacrifice and the cost that artists have with relationships to other human persons. I went into education myself because two things. Number one, I didn't want to face the fact that I might not get cast in things in the professional world. I don't know if it's an ego thing or if it was just fear, but I didn't want to turn my life over to somebody else or to a group of somebody else's, knowing full well that at any audition there were going to be 500 people who sing, act, and dance better than me, and what's going to be the thing that allows me to have that opportunity to work professionally. I never had the guts to do that. The other thing about the professional world, I think, too, is this opportunity then to perform these shows as an artist and to see the connection that an artist has. We in the local theater, I think in the Civic Theater here in Erie, in our region, we're artists as well. We're the only unpaid artists as actors in the world. We do not receive any compensation. Last night I'm singing. That's why I'm not wearing a tuxedo, because I need a cigarette and a martini for this conversation. I'm actually singing in the Philharmonic concert this afternoon. And there was a moment during our rehearsal last night, and it's wonderful, and it's great to sing with Ashley Brown, who was Broadway's Mary Poppins. She's the soloist, and she's just fabulous. And the orchestra really is good, and they are professionals, and they are union. And then I looked around the chorus, and I saw all of these other persons who had spent lots of money and lots of time preparing as performers. And I do lament the fact that in our community, the performers, the acting and singing performers, are not compensated in many ways. I would look forward to such a time when we actually have a professional company or an opportunity for trained actors to have that opportunity to be compensated for the work that they do. I recognize that would pretty much close every theater in town. We wouldn't necessarily be able to afford it, but someday we'll get to that place. But I found other places for me to be a performer and to perform, but I think that we're still artists, all of us. When Sondheim wrote Sweeney Todd, or Sunday in the Park with George, he was really trying to explore that idea of, where does the impetus come from? When you look at a white canvas, what do you see? Do you see potential, or do you see nothing? And for artists, I think the reality is that we see potential. During the strike of Moby Dick, I sat in the back. Well, I striked a little. And I sat in the back and I watched what was happening on stage. And I love that as a director, that feeling of a clean stage, because a clean stage is not the end of a show, but it's the opening and opportunity of something new. And I really thought for me, watching Sunday in the Park was that. And also watching George Seurat go through these extraordinary relationship issues. He just couldn't bring it back together. At the end of the first act, the entire piece comes together. The characters who have played they take their positions on the stage. The floor, the white floor, turns to the color of the grass in the painting. Everything flies in, trees fly in, slide in, dogs pop up from the ground. It was just, and suddenly a frame, a big gold gilt frame, comes in and frames the entire proscenium, and you're looking at the actual painting, modified. It was one of the most extraordinary moments I had ever seen, and I also felt so connected to the artistic vision and the artistic statements that Sondheim and James Lapine, the book writer, were making. And I think James Lapine also directed that production. It was extraordinary, absolutely. It was one of those things where you walk out of it and I say, I don't think I ever want to direct a musical or anything ever again, because I will never be able to do what they just did. But then again, it's the desire to try, right? The desire to fill our own spaces and to be the artists that we have to be. There are so many stories to tell. There are so many productions to do. There are so many opportunities and people to work with and collaborate with. I think that's what ultimately drives us on. So for me, Sunday in the Park is the pinnacle of the experience. Finishing the hat from Sondheim on Sondheim just brought all of that back for me in a wonderful way. So that's kind of my experiences with Sondheim. I don't know if anybody has, I don't know, I have no idea how long I've been talking. I don't have a watch on.
34 minutes.
Holy crap, 34 minutes. Wow, that is the longest I have ever spoken without a glass. No, Zach is shaking his head. No, I've spoken longer. Okay. So if there are any questions, either from the remnant who are here or online, I certainly would love to hear, or perspectives that you have on Sondheim. In many ways, this is kind of an elegy to him as well. Anyone? Bueller, do you have a favorite Sondheim show, and why?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I can put you on.
I love Spot.
So you, I think, are someone who have admitted that lyrics are sometimes elusive.
Yeah.
Sondheim writes in a way that can be very unforgiving. If you drop a lyric, there's no circling back to it. Can you maybe talk about your experience with that?
Yeah, I find
for memorizing Sondheim?
I think Sondheim, I do better with Sondheim than I do with other pieces. I think the inanity of contemporary lyrics, for example. And I know I'm going to sound like that older guy in the room, but I find some of the rhyme schemes to be overly simple. I find them to be self-serving and not necessarily revealing of character. So I would say that a lot of contemporary musicals, I think, are fine. I find a more difficult time memorizing those lyrics. I have difficult time memorizing some of the Golden Age lyrics also because they just all sound the same to me. With Sondheim, because it was novel, because it was inventive, because it was unexpected, you have to be on the edge of that. And so I have always had more success in Sondheim shows, even shoving Sweeney Todd. And I watched a recording of it. We have a archive recording of it, and I had a chance to listen to myself, and I went, oh my God, I actually sang that whole entire show. How did that happen? And it's pretty amazing. And I think part of that is because of its complexity, and I think because of the challenge. I am the kind of person who responds to challenge more than I respond to simplicity. There's things I can phone in, but unfortunately, when I do phone them in, that's when things start to fray, right? It's a great lesson. Every show has to be addressed aggressively. So because Sondheim lyrics are, don't ask me to quote any of them right now because I'm not in rehearsal for anything at the moment. But because Sondheim lyrics are so pointed, you really have to sing them correctly. And if you don't, you lose something. It's like Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter, and there are beats, and the beats align with the heartbeat, and the heartbeat aligns with the emotion of the character. You can't violate that. I think Sondheim is like that as well. You're not allowed to not know the lyrics, because if you don't, that's right, you will find yourself in a different place. With Moby Dick, Can't Stop the Night, I made up lyrics, and they sounded, in one case, better than the ones that were originally written. And so it's this opportunity, I think that you have some freedom there. Sondheim doesn't let you do that, and part of that is that you know that if you sing the lyrics the way they're written, you will go where the character needs to go. Other musicals, you can get to the character. You could cut the songs out completely and just do the scenes, and the character would still develop the same way. With Sondheim, the character's in the songs. That's where it is. So I actually find Sondheim easier to memorize than banality of 21st century musical theater. Yeah, I said it. I'll say it again. Dear Evan, shut up. That's what I call it. Dear Evan, what is that? Yeah.
If anybody has not read Sondheim's books,
yes,
Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat, because what you're saying about the lyrics, you see a lot of examples of how hard he is on himself.
Yeah.
About the times where he wasn't able to find just the right word to express what he wanted to say, and how important he felt it was to get a certain idea into a song. He goes into great detail, and it's wonderful.
It is wonderful. Yeah, when I was reading it, I was thinking, when I had an opportunity to study at the Royal National, and I'll drop my name drop with a program run by Anthony Hopkins. And at this moment, Michael Joyce was my acting teacher, and Michael Joyce would talk about he was working on a Beckett piece with Samuel Beckett. And Beckett, this is just one example, he would come to the moment in a play where he had written, I really need a cup of tea. Cup of tea, mug of cup. And he would work with the sounds, the phonemes of the words, until he knew it was the right word at the right time and in relationship to all the other words around it. That's when I was reading those books, that's what I found too, is at Sondheim, it's not just finding the right word, it's finding the right word in sequence and in combination with the other words, knowing what the connotations are of that word, but also knowing what's the vowel sound that you're going to ask this actor to sing on, and making sure that it's the vowel that's going to capture the emotion, that's going to reinforce the word, that's going to reinforce the phrase in the song in that moment in the play. His appreciation of the craft was extraordinary, and he was so good at it. And he would talk about moments that he thought he was less successful. I love the lyrics of Gypsy. I think they're great. And it was another show that he almost didn't write. because he thought, I don't want to just do this again and again. Oscar Hammerstein said, do it. It's 6 months. You'll be done with it, and then you can get to your work. And you've got another credit working with not just now Bernstein, but now Julie Stein. So you've worked with another legit composer. And the other thing he said to him, Hammerstein said to Sondheim, was, and you've written for an actor. You've written a song for Ethel Merman. And if she likes you, you're going places, because she was a controller at the time. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, those two books on how he went about his craft they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Other questions, comments?
I have another.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I think at one point, that this is almost like eulogizing Sondheim.
Yeah.
And anytime someone of great importance passes, we tend to have this flood of positive emotions and remembrance. Do you think that's something that is going to endure? Like, where do you put Sondheim in terms of theater history?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. As I was looking at the cancel culture that we have in our more progressive area, and theater is a very progressive place. We've always stood up for the marginalized. We've always tried to give access and accessibility to individuals. When I think about Sondheim, some musicals you look at. I just sat on a panel for the American Musicologist Conference this past summer, and we were talking about the Asian musicals and Amerasian musicals of Rodgers and Hammerstein, and we were talking about how difficult it is to do something like South Pacific, where you have characters who speak in broken English in very stereotypical ways, and they use melodies which sound like they should be Asian, but they're not Asian. They're Caucasian perspective of what an Asian song might sound like. And although it does celebrate culture, I mean, one of the great things about South Pacific, for example, is Cable's song "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught," which reminds us that racism and bigotry are things that are taught. And you also have to put it in the context of, this was the 1940s. This was a step forward, even though from our 21st century perspective, it seems to be incomplete. There's a lot of shows that we would almost have to write a lot of footnotes to in order to do them. Now, I think we should still do them. The West Side Story film that's coming out. West Side Story is problematic in its depiction of Latinx individuals. And so we have to deal with that. But at the same time, I'm not ready to throw away Bernstein's extraordinary score, or those great dance sequences, which not necessarily America, but the dance at the gym are cool, that capture the vibe of the 1950s urban life. So I'm not willing to throw those away yet, but we do have to put everything in a context. With Sondheim's work, as I go back and look through them, it's easy. I mean, the recent production of Company, where Bobby is a woman, and you didn't have to change, you might have had to change some of the relationships, but you didn't have to change much else. I mean, you can sing Being Alive as a man or a woman or anything in between, and you haven't violated the story. You haven't violated the characters. That, for me, is exciting. That's why I think Sondheim will transcend and will be eternal, because the music is bigger than any one, any set of demographics, right? It's gonna be bigger than any of those things at all. I think we'll see Sondheim forever. And also, the music is complex enough that as we move into new expressions and new compositions and new ways of composing, I think that he will still have a legitimacy. It might be the novelty, like right now as we listen to Gregorian chant. I think it's really kind of cool myself, but I look at it from a historical perspective, but I also find it to be very spiritual. I think we'll look at Sondheim in the same way. There might come a time when Sondheim's melodies seem naive, but I think they'll also seem novel, always. So
where do you put him in terms of other theater artists? Is he Rodgers and Hammerstein? Is he Shakespeare? Is he Tony Kushner?
Yeah. All of the above. I mean, for me, Rodgers and Hammerstein did the best they could with what they had at the moment that they were writing. I really do, and I think there are some glorious melodies. But again, technology has a lot to do with it. Sondheim's music could not have survived in those old playhouses without amplification and without certain kind of accompaniment. So I think that we're going to look at him in the same way as a true genius. We throw the word genius and incredible around. Oh my God, you're incredible. Oh my God, you're awesome. Yeah, no, you're not. We're all pretty mediocre when you get right down to it, right? And we should love our mediocrity. I think if we loved our mediocrity more, then when somebody like Sondheim comes around and we go, now that's genius. Now that's extraordinary. That's amazing. We amaze one another way too much, I think. Yeah. Anything else? All right, I'm going to go sing with Ashley Brown. Woo!
Thank you, Shawn.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Woo! Mask up out there.